She stayed home to raise their son, and now his family wants every dollar of her first paycheck, every single dollar she was about to earn. Gone. Not to their household, not to their son, not to their future. To people who had spent years calling her names and treating her like dirt. And the worst part is, they actually thought they had a right to it. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story has layers that are going to make your jaw drop one by one. This woman and her fiancé have been together since they were teenagers. Young love, growing up together, building a life side by side. They were the kind of couple who figured out the world together in real time, who made mistakes and adapted and kept choosing each other anyway. His grandparents raised him, and from day one they made it crystal clear that they did not like her. Not just a subtle coldness either. We are talking years of being put down, called names, criticized, and treated like she was the source of every problem in that family. Years of walking into a room and feeling the temperature drop. Years of biting her tongue at family gatherings because she loved him and she was not going to be the reason things fell apart. Years of hearing whispered comments just loud enough to sting and just quiet enough to deny. And she stayed. She stayed because she loved him, and she was building something real, something that she believed was worth protecting even when the people surrounding it were not. At 16 years old, she found out she was pregnant. On birth control. Let that land for a moment, because this was not a careless decision. This was a teenager doing what she was supposed to do, and life happened anyway, the way it sometimes does regardless of preparation. And instead of things getting easier, they got harder almost immediately. She was in and out of the hospital the entire pregnancy because of complications. Her body, already young and still developing, was under enormous strain. There was a point where she physically could not work anymore, where just getting through a single day required more energy than most adults spend in a week. She was a teenager, her body was failing her, she was facing a future that looked nothing like what she had planned, and she was doing everything she could just to get through each day with her baby still safe. And she did. In June of 2020, she gave birth to their son. Then, 1 month later, everything got even heavier. Their baby was diagnosed with serious health conditions. Not minor things. Not the kind of things that a quick prescription fixes and everyone moves on. Real, ongoing, complex medical needs that required multiple doctor appointments every single week, sometimes several times a week, driving 30 minutes each way into the city through traffic and weather and whatever else life threw at them. Think about what that schedule actually looks like on paper, and then think about what it feels like to live it. You are not just driving. You are preparing a medically fragile infant for transport, you are tracking symptoms and updating doctors and absorbing information and making decisions and managing fear, all while trying to hold yourself together because your baby needs you calm. This baby needed his mother present, consistent, and available. Not available between meetings. Not available after a shift. Available, completely, the way only a full-time caregiver can be. So she stayed home. Not because she was lazy. Not because she was taking advantage of anyone. She stayed home because it was the only thing that made sense, and because she and her fiancé sat down together and agreed, as partners, as parents, that this was the right call for their family. They weighed it. They talked it through. If she worked, every dollar she made would have disappeared into daycare costs before it even reached their bank account. And their son could not have been left in daycare anyway, not with how many appointments he needed, not with how medically complex his situation was. A standard daycare worker is not equipped to manage the level of care he required. She was not choosing comfort over contribution. This was not a luxury. This was survival, dressed up in the mundane clothing of daily routine so that nobody from the outside could see how hard it actually was. For years she held that household together. She raised a child with serious health needs through what should have been the most isolating and exhausting stretch of anyone's early life. She managed appointments and medications and logistics and the specific, grinding emotional weight of watching your child struggle medically while also trying to keep your household from falling apart around you. She tracked the details that doctors needed. She learned the vocabulary of his conditions because she had to. She sat in waiting rooms and sterile exam rooms and car seats and parking lots, and she did it over and over again, week after week, because that was what her son needed. That is not nothing. That is an enormous, exhausting, invisible labor that people love to celebrate in the abstract and dismiss entirely the second it becomes inconvenient for them. Then July of 2023 hits. They are all in the car together, the whole family, and they get into an accident. The kind of moment that stops time. The kind of moment where everything shifts in a split second and you are suddenly dealing with consequences you did not see coming. Nobody knew the insurance had lapsed. Not her. Not even her fiancé, really, not until the officer on the scene told them. It had lapsed by days. Days. Not months of negligence. Days of bad timing hitting at the worst possible moment. And in October of that same year, a restitution letter arrived for $15,000. Her fiancé's debt. His insurance, his car, his responsibility, in every legal and logical sense of those words. His grandparents stepped in and helped him financially. That is what families do. That is, genuinely, a good thing, and she never said otherwise. But at no point did she borrow that money. At no point did anyone call her into a room and explain the terms. At no point did anyone ask her to sign anything or promise anything or acknowledge that she was entering into an agreement of any kind. She was not part of that arrangement. She was the partner of the person who was. Then in February of 2024, his grandparents bought him a car. And yes, she is upfront about her role in this, which is actually one of the more telling details in the whole story. She was the one who suggested he call them to come look at it, because the grandparents themselves had already been driving the family to their son's medical appointments and had told them directly to go find a car. She was solving a problem. She was doing what any practical, exhausted parent does when a solution presents itself, and she connected the dots. The car was a good deal. It made sense. It was practical and necessary given everything the family was managing. It was in his name, only his name, and again, no one pulled her aside and said, "You are taking on a debt here, you understand that, right?" No one. Because she was not taking on a debt. He was. Now it is May of 2026. She is weeks away from starting a new job. Her son is in kindergarten, which is its own quiet milestone after everything they went through to get him stable and thriving. She fought through everything, the pregnancy complications, the fear, the years of medical appointments, the judgment from people who never had to live her life, the criticism from his family who treated her like a burden instead of a person, and she made it to the other side. She is ready to work, ready to contribute financially to her household in the way she has always contributed in every other way that does not come with a paycheck. And she is genuinely happy about it. She said so herself. She is more than willing to split the household bills. She wants to pull her weight. She is not trying to sidestep responsibility. She is trying to step into it. But then comes the conversation that changes everything. She is told off flatly that the entirety of her paychecks are supposed to go to his family. Not a portion. Not a negotiated repayment plan with a clear endpoint. Not a reasonable conversation between adults about how to handle an old debt. All of it. Her entire income, from a job she worked hard to get, was supposed to be handed over to people who have spent years tearing her down, for debts she never agreed to, never signed for, and is not legally bound to in any way. Think about what that moment feels like. You have spent years sacrificing, years holding things together, years being told in 100 small ways that you are not enough, and then the moment you are finally about to have something of your own, something earned, something yours, it gets claimed before you even see it. Let me just let that sit for a second. She is a wheelchair user, by the way. She mentioned it almost as a footnote when people in the comments asked why she did not just walk dogs or find some side work during those years. As if the answer to that question should have been obvious. As if she had not already considered every option available to her. She was a wheelchair user trying to navigate caring for a medically complex child during a pandemic and beyond, managing all of that from a body that comes with its own set of daily challenges, and people still wanted to know why she was not doing more. The audacity of that question says everything about how society treats mothers who make sacrifices that are invisible until the moment someone decides to take advantage of them. Here's what makes this situation so infuriating on a deeper level. These grandparents did not help out of some open-hearted generosity that was ever meant to extend to her. They helped their grandson. They made an agreement with their grandson. He accepted their money. He accepted their car. He is the one who benefited from those decisions, and he is the one who owes them. Every single thread of accountability in this situation points directly at him, not at her. And yet here they are, reaching past him and going after her income, framing her years as a stay-at-home mother as some kind of fraudulent arrangement that conveniently allowed their grandson to need their financial help. As if she engineered all of it. As if a teenager on birth control who ended up in and out of the hospital planned any of this. And what does her fiancé do in the middle of all of this? He is in the comments apparently telling people that she told him to call his grandparents about the car, like that is the smoking gun that proves she owes his family her entire paycheck. She suggested he call them to look at a car that his grandparents themselves had already told the family to go find. She was solving a logistical problem for her household. That is not co-signing a debt. That is not entering a financial agreement. That is a woman doing what partners do. The fact that he is surfacing that detail publicly, throwing it out there as evidence against her, instead of standing firmly between her and his family's demands, says everything that needs to be said about where his loyalty actually sits when things get hard. She is not the asshole. Not even close. She is someone who gave years of her life to her family, who made every major decision alongside her partner with full transparency, who never borrowed a single cent from those grandparents, and who is now being told that her first paycheck belongs to people who have never once treated her with the basic dignity she deserved. The answer here is not to hand over her income. The answer is for her fiancé to grow a spine and handle his own debts with his own family, and for her to protect her financial future with everything she has got. Because she has earned that future. Every single grueling year of it. My wife keeps blaming our son's meltdowns on ADHD, and yesterday someone got hit in the face. He watched his 6-year-old son scream that he was going to blow up an ice cream shop, and his wife turned to the strangers in line and just said, "Sorry, he has ADHD," like that was the end of the conversation. That moment right there is the whole story. That is where this family is right now. Let's back up and be fair about what we are actually dealing with here, because this situation is more complicated than a simple right and wrong, and it deserves a real look. This couple has a 6-year-old son who was recently diagnosed with ADHD. He got kicked out of one school and is now attending a different school that has a specialized program for kids with behavioral challenges. His behavior has been genuinely difficult. We are not talking about a kid who talks too loud or wiggles in his chair. We are talking about hitting people with a plastic baseball bat, threatening to blow up schools and now ice cream shops, and full-blown meltdowns in public. Picture what that actually looks like. A small boy, barely tall enough to reach a countertop, voice going raw and red-faced in the middle of a crowded shop with people staring and a line stretching out the door, while his parents try to hold it together without completely falling apart themselves. That is a heavy load for any family, and you can feel the exhaustion radiating off both of these parents even through a text post. This is not a couple arguing about chores or money or whose turn it is to cook dinner. This is two people who are genuinely drowning and have started blaming each other for the water. The dad in this story clearly loves his son. He says it himself, loves him to death. But he is frustrated, and the frustration has been building for a while, accumulating like pressure behind a sealed door. He is watching his wife respond to serious behavioral incidents by announcing their son's diagnosis to whoever is nearby and then moving on, and he feels like that approach is not just ineffective, it is actively making things worse. There is probably a helplessness underneath that frustration too, a feeling that every time he tries to actually address the behavior, something or someone diffuses it before it lands. He is not wrong to be concerned. Handing someone a medical label as an explanation and then walking away is not the same as helping that person learn, grow, or understand the impact of their actions. And when you are the parent who is trying to do the hard work of accountability in real time, watching that work get quietly dismantled is an almost unbearable kind of lonely. Here is the thing though. ADHD is real, and the way it shows up in children is deeply misunderstood by most people, including a lot of parents. ADHD is not just about energy levels or distraction. In young children, especially those who have not yet had enough time on the right medication or enough targeted behavioral therapy, impulse control can be genuinely, severely impaired. That kid is not deciding to scream obscenities or swing a bat at his cousin. The part of his brain that is supposed to pump the brakes before an action fires is working at a fraction of the speed it should be. The thought becomes the word becomes the action, and there is almost no space in between. That is not an excuse. That is a neurological reality, and it matters. It matters for how his parents respond, it matters for how his teachers respond, and it matters enormously for how he is eventually going to understand himself. So what the mom is doing is not entirely wrong either. She is not saying her son is not responsible for anything forever. She is communicating context to strangers who would otherwise just see a screaming child and assume the worst about him, about her, about their whole family. Parents of kids with behavioral or neurological differences learn very quickly that a brief explanation can prevent a much uglier reaction from the public. She is probably exhausted, probably embarrassed, probably doing the only thing she knows how to do in those moments to get through them. There is a kind of survival mode that kicks in after enough public incidents, enough sideways glances, enough strangers muttering under their breath. You stop trying to manage the situation perfectly and you start just trying to get everyone out in one piece. That is where she is living right now. But here is where the dad has a genuinely valid point, and it is worth sitting with. There is a difference between explaining a diagnosis to an outsider and using that diagnosis as the permanent endpoint of every conversation about your child's behavior, including conversations with the child himself. If that 6-year-old boy is growing up hearing that his ADHD is why things happen, without also hearing that he can learn, that things can get better, that there are strategies and tools and expectations, then he is being set up to feel like a passenger in his own life. He will reach his teens and his 20s still waiting for the world to accommodate him instead of building the skills to meet it. And that is not compassion. That is a different kind of harm, quieter and slower but just as real. He also makes a point about the medication. Their son has been on medication for about a month, and the dad is already saying it does not seem to be working. 1 month is genuinely not a long time in the world of ADHD treatment. Finding the right medication and the right dose is often a process that takes months, sometimes longer, and during that adjustment period behavior can actually fluctuate in unexpected ways. New symptoms can surface, old ones can intensify before they ease, and the child himself may feel different in ways he cannot yet name or describe. So the frustration is understandable, but the expectation that 1 month of medication should have solved things is also not quite realistic. That expectation itself might be adding pressure to a situation that needs patience more than anything else right now. That is what makes this argument so hard. Both of these parents are partially right and partially not seeing the full picture. The dad is right that explaining is not the same as teaching. The mom is right that ADHD is a real explanation, not a lazy excuse. And they are both doing this without fully understanding each other's perspective, which means they are spending their energy fighting each other instead of building a strategy together. They are on the same team and they are pulling in opposite directions, and their son is standing in the middle watching the rope fray. I want to be honest about the ice cream moment specifically, because that is when the dad lost it and that matters. He did the right thing in that moment. He told his son to be quiet, he started walking him to the car, he removed him from the situation. That is exactly the kind of response a child with impulse control struggles needs. Clear, calm, immediate consequence. There is no lecture, no negotiation, no audience participation. Just a firm and steady hand guiding the moment toward a close. And then his wife's response in that moment, the casual sorry he has ADHD to the line of strangers, undercut what he was doing in real time. He was delivering a lesson, and she was dissolving it. The air went out of the consequence before it even had a chance to settle. You can see why he snapped. You can see exactly why that was the moment everything spilled over. Nobody is the villain here, which is actually kind of the saddest part of this story. What this family needs is not a winner and a loser in an argument about ADHD. They need to be sitting in the same room with a therapist, ideally one who specializes in pediatric behavioral challenges, and figuring out together what their approach looks like. Because right now they are running two completely different parenting philosophies in the same household, and their son is navigating that gap with no map. Children are remarkably perceptive about inconsistency. They find the seams between two different sets of rules and they live there, not out of manipulation exactly, but because that is where the pressure is lowest. If mom explains and dad corrects and neither of them knows what the other is going to do next, then nobody is actually steering. Here is where I land on this. The dad was not wrong to say what he said, but he was probably not delivering it in the most constructive way in the middle of a car ride home from an ice cream shop. The mom is not a bad mother for trying to manage public moments the only way she knows how right now. But she does need to hear the feedback that explanation without expectation is not actually serving her son. A diagnosis explains where a child is starting from. It does not determine where they end up, and it should never be the last word in a conversation about behavior. The real answer here is not who is right. The real answer is that this couple needs to get on the same page fast, because their son is 6 years old and the patterns being set right now will shape the next decade of his life. The habits of response that get reinforced in these early years are the ones that stick. If he grows up learning that ADHD is a reason things happen to him, he will never fully own his actions. If he grows up in a home where his parents are constantly at war over how to handle him, he will learn to play that gap instead of learning to grow through it. These parents both clearly love their son. That part is obvious and it is the most important part. But love without alignment is just two people trying to carry something heavy in opposite directions. They need to pick a direction together. And they need to do it soon. Drop a comment letting me know which story got you more fired up. And if you want more of this every week, a like and subscribe would mean the world.